Deterrence is the art of producing in the mind of the enemy the fear to attack. And so, because of the automated and irrevocable decision-making process which rules out human meddling, the doomsday machine is terrifying, it's simple to understand, and completely credible and convincing.
Gee, I wish we had one of them doomsday machines, Dainty.
Imagine that your enemies thought you possessed a weapon that was so powerful, so dangerous, that if you used it, they would be obliterated with no hope of survival. This knowledge of your weapon made them too scared to attack you, which conveniently meant you never had to use the weapon. All you had to do to make it was tell people that it existed, that you had it, and convince them it was real. This video is part of a series on fake atomics, the position that nuclear weapons are a fiction which serves political interests such as military deterrent, a way to scare your own population, control, and to justify enormous amounts of tax money being salted away in nuclear weapons accounts for supposed nuke research, production, and so on. In the last video I looked at an old film about a nuclear bomb test in the 50s. I think I sufficiently demonstrated the film showed no genuine atomic test, as the explosion was done on a small set with models, and therefore the actual purpose of the film was to deceive the viewer into believing that they had just seen a nuclear bomb detonation. Now I want to back up a bit and look at the Trinity test. This was the very first atomic bomb test in the world, conducted by the US Army in New Mexico, about 5:30 in the morning on July the 16th, 1945, as part of the Manhattan Project. The test was of an implosion-designed plutonium device called the Gadget, of the same design as the Fat Man bomb later detonated over Nagasaki, Japan on August 9th that year. So first, let's look at the time frame for this design process, the timeline of how the bomb came about. So first off, materials. Atomic bombs would use either uranium-235 or plutonium as the core fissile material to explode. Uranium-235 was only discovered in 1935 by Canadian physicist Arthur Dempster. It is the fissile, i.e. could in theory be used to make a nuclear explosion version of uranium, which makes up about 0.72% of all uranium on Earth, which is otherwise known as uranium-238. The majority of uranium is not usable in nuclear weaponry. Look up uranium-238, which is basically all uranium, 99% plus of uranium on the planet, and it tells you it's non-fissile, it cannot sustain a chain reaction that leads to a theoretical nuclear explosion. But in 1935, Dempster discovered this magical new version of uranium. The concept of nuclear fission of heavy elements was discovered in mid-December of 1938 by the German scientist Otto Hahn and his assistant Fritz Strassmann, and explained theoretically in January of 1939. So the US starts its Manhattan Project in 1942. They're working on a fission bomb, and this requires either uranium-235 or plutonium in large, i.e. kilogram quantities. But this is a problem. For example, here it says only 0.71% of natural uranium was uranium-235, and it was estimated that it would take about 27,000 years to produce a gram of uranium with their mass spectrometers, but kilogram amounts were required for the bomb. So then you could maybe use plutonium and said, well, plutonium is a synthetic element. It's got complicated properties. It's not found in nature in appreciable quantities. Plutonium itself was only invented in 1940, December 14th, 1940, by a deuteron bombardment of uranium-238 in the cyclotron at the University of California, Berkeley. Until mid-1944, the only plutonium that had been isolated had been produced in cyclotrons in microgram amounts, whereas again, atomic weaponry required kilograms. And if you read the Wikipedia entry on the Manhattan Project, it tells you that by December of 1943, they had only been able to produce 2 milligrams of plutonium. So realize, my point here is that the scientists are trying to make a bomb that would need kilograms of material that is either incredibly rare in nature or has to be manufactured artificially in very small quantities. I think it's important to know about so you realize the incredible odds of them even being able to make one bomb by 1945, given the rarity of material, given that this was all pure theory up until Trinity supposedly happened. So the original plan for a gun-type fission weapon was not viable. They instead had to come up with a more complicated theoretical model for an implosion type bomb, which they only started working on in August of 1944. There's a lot to get into with this, so I'm going to go into the gun type bomb they dropped on Hiroshima in another video. But what you need to understand is that by August of 1944, they had nothing that worked. No precedent of this thing working, no actual bomb, nothing but this theory of a fission bomb using incredibly rare elements. They'd worked on the gun type design for 2 years, but then with about a year before the war's end, they go, screw it, they make an entirely different bomb design and they go for it. So by the time they get the prototype bomb gadget with some plutonium, it's mid-July of 1945. The idea of an implosion bomb, the reason it's called an implosion bomb, is that you make a sphere, the critical component sphere, the fissile sphere in the center, which has lots of little explosives around it. When you trigger the bomb, you trigger the explosives. They detonate simultaneously, and this shockwave, sort of symmetrical, spherical shockwave, pushes the fissile material together to make it go critical. This is the science. Apparently, an otherwise unresponsive lump of metal gets squeezed like a lemon by the pressure of lots of small explosions, and it makes a magic big explosion that releases enormous amounts of energy, heat, light, electromagnetic energy, gamma rays, etc., way beyond the energy normally contained in the original material, through the magical process of fission, which hopefully stops after a short time. It doesn't continue to split and release energy indefinitely, but it makes a very big explosion. Here I'm going to include here some sketches for when they were first kicking off the Manhattan Project, and some ideas of how the core elements would go together to make it a sufficient amount of material to go critical. Because that's the other thing, you can have the right material, but until you get the right amount of material, the right weight of it effectively coming together, then it becomes optimal for it to go critical and explode properly. If you have it like a kilogram under, it doesn't work. Apparently, this is the science of it. So I like how they tested a plutonium implosion bomb in mid-July. They rush over to Hiroshima for the first week of August, and then they drop the uranium gun-type bomb, Little Boy, the model for which had never been tested. This makes absolutely no sense. You would test the bomb you were going to use in the upcoming bombardment. If you were going to use two different types of bomb, you'd need to test both. Testing Type A, dropping Type B, then later using Type A makes no sense to me. They say that as well, that there was no need to test the gun-type bomb prior to Hiroshima, and no need to run additional tests for the implosion bomb after Trinity. Because this is such rock solid science, you don't even worry if it will work or not. They were absolutely confident that the gun type bomb would just work perfectly first time. But then if you think about it, after the war, the US, for example, the US alone performed over 1,000 tests of nuclear explosions. Why so much testing after the war when the whole idea was that they were so confident in it that it basically barely needed testing in the first place? Again, makes no sense. So looking at Gadget, the Gadget is the test bomb to then be put into the Fat Man shell casing and dropped from a plane. Look at them. This is some incredible engineering here that in the space of just a couple of weeks between the Gadget being tested and the Fat Man being dropped, they managed to streamline and shrink the bomb so much. The Gadget is much bigger than the bomb they would need to fit inside the 60-inch Fat Man shell casing. I like how they say as well that there's only minor differences between it. It's a much more streamlined thing to go inside Fat Man. The casing for Fat Man would be being built and shipped around the same time Gadget was hulking around at White Sands. The size is way off. Gadget is large and complex compared to Fat Man. Fat Man is sleek and streamlined in comparison. So how did they do that? Plus, as well, there's an interesting thing here about the use of Jumbo. Jumbo is a container that they built and got to White Sands. It was built in case the Trinity Gadget failed to detonate properly. So that the plutonium could be saved. The reason for this is that they didn't have enough for a second test. So apparently they didn't have enough plutonium by 1945 for a second test of a bomb, but they did have enough for Fat Man. So they have a very interesting section on the Trinity nuclear test narrative called the 100-ton test. This is where they decided that they would do a rehearsal for Trinity. A rehearsal using conventional explosives. So this was held on the 7th of May 1945, in which 108 short tons of high explosive were detonated at Trinity at the top of the tower. They spiked the explosives with radioactive isotopes so that when the bomb went off they would be able to get radiation readings, and apparently this would be used to calibrate the explanation is that it was to calibrate their instrumentation. I think this is a very interesting red flag that they decided to do a rehearsal for one type of bomb using regular explosives. It begs the question that if they wanted a rehearsal of this detonation, why didn't they just rehearse it with a smaller nuclear detonation? Surely that would be the only way you could properly rehearse the detonation of Gadget, would be to have a smaller version of Gadget. So let's have a look at the photographic evidence and the visual evidence of the Trinity experiment. So first of all, we've got these images of soldiers watching the detonation, allegedly. This is a bit weird for several reasons. One is that the photo is clearly taken during the day. The blast was supposed to be around sort of 5:30 in the morning before sunrise or so, but the light is wrong for that. Two is that this explosion of a 20 kiloton bomb is tiny compared to the mushroom cloud for example, the Baker atomic test that was done in the South Pacific a few years later. The Baker test was 23 kilotons. So it's amazing how you can go from 20 kilotons here to 23 kilotons here, and the completely different scale of explosive. The most important point, of course, is that this is all nonsense anyway. The photo is a paste-up collage. The light is wrong. The soldiers aren't there. It's a collage. Same in this photo as well. The soldiers aren't actually there in that shot. We've also got this one of the camera crew who are apparently filming it. Again, this is nonsense. They are not. The silhouettes sort of slotted in as a collage image. It's not a genuine image. Another point to make would be that with the detonation of an atomic warhead, there would be a release of gamma rays which would blind everyone at that range. So, for example, the crowd of soldiers, are they even wearing protective equipment? It doesn't look like it. Goggles would be unlikely to protect them either. This is the first time this had been done. I doubt they'd had the shielding sorted out properly. And even if you closed your eyes, the gamma rays would go through your eyelids, and you'd be in a lot of pain and you'd be blinded most likely. So, what should have happened here is you should have had a lot of people being made blind. That didn't happen. Then you got the one photo. Supposedly, there was one official, professional. They got a proper cameraman in, and he took a photo of the Gadget detonation, and it's terrible. Is that really the best image they could have gotten? Years later, they said, "Oh, we've got a HD remaster of it." Of the explosion. We've got a fantastic new image that showed us this. I don't know what this is supposed to be. It looks like bubbling liquid. Apparently, this is a real explosion. Flash frozen one frame of it. I would argue no, it's not. It's shenanigans with buggering about with photography equipment essentially. You've then got this film as well.
A special camera called the Rapidtronic was developed at EG&G to photograph the initial burst of energy in the first millionth of a second. 6 cameras simultaneously captured the progression of the fireball as it vaporized the tower. Here, these images are combined to give the impression of motion.
These were standard motion picture cameras to produce documentary footage in black and white and in color at both normal and advanced speeds. This O'Brien camera achieved ultra-high speeds through use of an image dissector and a film drum whirling inside. This camera was capable of making 15 million pictures a second.
The cameras were mounted on racks up on top of a 300-foot tower in a cab. And so usually in each tower we had 6 cameras. And they were stacked one on top of the other. And this is so precise that we can have 2 cameras sitting side by side or 600 meters apart and have them go off within a millionth of a second of each other. And that way we can make these diameter measurements to make the efficiency measurements.
It's amazing what you can do through a combination of shooting the sun, going through clouds, liquid bubbles, visual effects like that with lights, and the odd high altitude shot of a conventional explosive going off, all allegedly through the guise of loads of really high speed cameras on giant poles that aren't affected by electromagnetic radiation or any of the radiation that's being pumped out by the bomb. Incredible, isn't it? They had that back then, first time. There's a ridiculous bit on Wikipedia about fallout from the Trinity test with cattle losing their hair, place miles away had camera footage affected, Kodak had camera footage affected, but apparently although it was able to damage film miles away, the film and the eyeballs of people at the site, they were fine. One of my absolute favourite images is this one. This is Major General Leslie Groves, who's kind of in charge of things, and Robert Oppenheimer, who's a chief scientist there. They're standing, believe it or not, they're supposed to be standing at the blast site after the explosion's gone off. They're in these little white overshoes. They're not worried about radiation, obviously, clearly not worried about radiation. The ground is not scorched. It's not glassed like it should be. There's no crater. It's supposed to be, if you go on the nps.government website, it talks about the history of the Trinity site. I'll leave a link in the description. They claim where the tower had been was a crater 1/2 mile across and 8 feet deep. Sand in the crater was fused by the intense heat into a glass-like solid, the colour of green jade. This material was given the name Trinitite. The explosion point was named Trinity site. So, yeah, here we can see it again. There's no crater, there's no glass. No glass at all. There's no trinitite. There's a monument nowadays at the centre of where the explosion was. Again, it's not a monument in a crater. There's no glassing. There's no mention of filling in the crater, which presumably somebody had to do with shovels. We do, of course, have this. If you go to the site, you can have a look at this little display case. I like the little radiation warning sticker they've got in there. It's definitely not just green glass. Definitely not just green glass. That's that special magical nuclear waste glass. So just again, loads of photos of a complete lack of a crater, people standing in the crater, close up of a bit of trinitite, but no photos of the mass glassing that would have occurred. It would have been a really cool image. In real life, if this had happened, people would take photos of the crater. They'd take photos of the sheets of green glass everywhere, or huge sections of slabs of green glass all over the ground. They haven't done it. It's not there. So where does that leave us? Well, we have a magic bomb that uses magic material that they supposedly scrape together just in time to make one bomb, but first they rehearse the detonation by setting off a normal explosion, and then later make a giant glowing green crater of glass that's not in any of the photos they say is the evidence of the thing occurring, also providing doctored photographs. The theory is shaky, the logistics of manufacture unlikely, the documentation falsified, and the accounts are contradictory. They were making it up. There was no atomic test at Trinity. Just like there are no nuclear weapons.